The auction yard smelled like manure and desperation. Nora had been standing on the platform for 7 minutes. She knew because she'd counted every second, focusing on the numbers to keep herself from screaming. 7 minutes of men circling below like vultures, squinting up at her in the afternoon glare, assessing her the way they'd assess a horse. Teeth, hands, hips. She kept her chin up, kept her eyes fixed on the horizon line beyond the crowd, kept breathing. "Lot 47, the auctioneer called out, his voice crackling with false enthusiasm. "Young woman, 18 years, healthy, literate, no family obligations." No family obligations, that was one way to say it. The other way was utterly alone in the world. Her father had died 6 weeks ago. Influenza, the doctor said, though Nora suspected it was more the whiskey than the fever that finally stopped his heart. Either way, he'd left her with nothing but debt. The mercantile wanted payment. The bank wanted payment. The landlord wanted payment. And when the numbers were tallied and the creditors came knocking, Nora discovered she was the only thing left worth selling. "Let's start the bidding at $50, the auctioneer announced. Silence. Nora's stomach turned. Even as chattel, she wasn't worth much. Then a voice from the back. "50. The auctioneer's face brightened. $50. Do I hear 60? "60, said another man, closer to the front. Nora recognized him, Carl Hutchins, who owned the feed store and had a wife already. Her skin crawled. 70, came a third voice. The bids climbed. 75, 80, 90. Nora tried to disappear inside herself. She thought about her mother, dead since Nora was 12, wondered if this was what it felt like to be a ghost, present but not really there, watching your own life happen to someone else. 100, Carl Hutchins shouted, grinning up at her. The auctioneer raised his gavel. $100, going once? 200. The voice was quiet, steady. It didn't shout. The crowd turned. A man stood near the back of the gathering, half in shadow. Tall, lean, weathered in the way men got when they spent more time with cattle than people. He wore dusty work clothes and a hat pulled low, but even from the platform, Nora could see his eyes, dark, tired, and completely unreadable. Carl Hutchins laughed. 200? For that scrap of a girl? The stranger didn't respond, didn't even look at Carl. His gaze stayed fixed on the auctioneer. $200, the auctioneer repeated, clearly delighted. Do I hear 220? Carl's face reddened. He glanced back at the stranger, then at Nora, then seemed to decide she wasn't worth the fight. He shook his head and spat into the dust. Going once, the auctioneer called. Nora's heart hammered. She looked at the stranger. He still hadn't looked at her. Not really. Not the way the others had. Going twice? She wanted to run, wanted to jump off the platform and disappear into the mountains, but her legs wouldn't move. Sold. To Mr. Calhoun. For $200. The gavel cracked like a gunshot. And just like that, Nora Finch belonged to someone new. The stranger, Calhoun, didn't approach her immediately. He stayed where he was while the auctioneer's assistant climbed onto the platform and untied the rope around her wrists. The rope had been mostly symbolic. Nora wasn't bound tight enough to hurt, just enough to make it clear she wasn't a guest. You're a lucky girl, the assistant muttered as he worked the knot loose. Calhoun's decent enough. Won't beat you, probably. Probably. What a comfort. When the rope fell away, Nora rubbed her wrists and descended the platform steps on shaking legs. The crowd was already dispersing, moving on to the next lot. A plow, she thought, or maybe a wagon. Something useful. Calhoun waited near a hitching post where a sturdy-looking bay horse stood tied. He was older than Nora had initially thought, maybe 35, maybe 40. Hard to tell with men who lived outside. His face was lined, but not unkind. He had the look of someone who'd forgotten how to smile but might remember, given enough time. When she reached him, he finally met her eyes. You got belongings? He asked. His voice matched the rest of him, low, rough, economical. No. He nodded as if he'd expected that answer. You ride? Not well. You'll learn. He untied the horse and swung into the saddle with the ease of long practice. Then he looked down at her. You can ride behind me or walk. It's 15 miles to the ranch. Nora glanced at the road stretching west into the hills. 15 miles. In this heat, in the dress she'd been wearing for 3 days straight. She reached up, Calhoun gripped her forearm and pulled her up behind him in one smooth motion. The horse sidestepped, adjusting to the extra weight, then settled. "Hold on," Calhoun said. Nora wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid muscle beneath the worn fabric of his shirt. He smelled like leather and wood smoke and something else. Soap, maybe, or just clean sweat. It was strange being this close to a man she didn't know. Strange and terrifying and somehow not as awful as she'd feared. He clicked his tongue and the horse started walking. They rode in silence. The town fell away behind them, the auction yard, the dusty streets, the buildings that had never felt like home even when Nora lived there. She watched it shrink into the distance and felt nothing. No relief, no sorrow. Just a peculiar emptiness, like she'd been hollowed out and was waiting to be filled with something new. After a while, Calhoun spoke. "You got a name?" "Nora. Nora Finch." He nodded. "Daniel Calhoun. You can call me Daniel or Calhoun. Don't much matter which." She almost said, "What should I call you, master?" But bit her tongue. She wasn't a slave, technically. The law didn't allow for that anymore. But she wasn't free, either. She was an indenture, a contract, a piece of property dressed up in legal language to make it palatable. "What do you want from me?" she asked quietly. Daniel didn't answer right away. The horse's hooves clipped steadily against the packed dirt road. "I got 2 children," he said eventually. "Lost my wife a year back. Since then, I've hired 4 different women to help with the house and the kids. None of them lasted more than a month." "Why not?" His shoulders tensed beneath her hands. "Kids are difficult." That was all he said. Just difficult. But Nora heard volumes in the way he said it. Frustration and grief and something that might have been shame. "How old are they?" she asked. "Lizzie's 10, Sam's 7. And what happened to the women you hired?" "Lizzie happened." He exhaled slowly. "She's got her mother's temper and her own particular brand of meanness. Drives people off on purpose. Sam follows her lead." Nora absorbed this. "So you bought me because you think I won't be able to leave." "I bought you because I'm out of options." His voice was flat, honest. "I can't run a ranch and raise 2 wild children alone. I need help. You need a roof over your head. That's the arrangement." It was, Nora supposed, more honest than most marriages. "And if I'm no better than the other 4, she asked, "then we'll both be miserable, but at least you'll be fed." She almost laughed. Would have, if the situation weren't so bleak. They rode on. The Calhoun Ranch appeared in the late afternoon, rising out of the golden hills like something carved from the land itself. It was bigger than Nora expected. A sprawling main house with a wide porch, a barn, several outbuildings, and fenced pastures stretching toward the mountains. Cattle dotted the fields, red and brown shapes against the grass. It looked, she thought, like the kind of place where people built lives, raised families, grew old. It looked nothing like the cramped boarding house room where her father had drunk himself to death. Daniel guided the horse to the front of the house and dismounted. He helped Nora down, his hands firm and impersonal, then led the horse toward the barn. "Go on inside," he said. "Kids should be there." Nora climbed the porch steps and paused at the door. Her hand hovered over the latch. On the other side was her new life, whatever that meant. New children, new rules, new everything. She pushed the door open. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight, and it took her eyes a moment to adjust. When they did, she saw a large main room with a stone fireplace, a worn sofa, a dining table, and walls lined with shelves. Everything was clean but cluttered in the way of homes where no one had time for tidying. And in the center of the room stood 2 children. The girl, Lizzie, was tall for 10, all sharp angles and suspicious eyes. She had dark hair pulled into a messy braid and her father's guarded expression. The boy, Sam, was smaller, rounder, with lighter hair and a face that might have been sweet if it weren't currently twisted into a scowl. They stared at Nora. Nora stared back. "You're the new one," Lizzie said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Nora." "We didn't ask your name." Lizzie crossed her arms. "How long you planning to stay?" "I don't know," Nora said honestly. "The last one left after 2 weeks. The one before that made it 3. "What about the first one?" 5 days? Lizzie smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. "She cried a lot." Sam snickered. Nora stepped further into the room, letting the door swing shut behind her. She kept her voice calm. What did you do to make her cry? Nothing. Lizzie's smile widened. We were just ourselves. I see. You should leave now, Sam offered helpfully. Before you get attached. Nora studied them both. They were testing her, obviously, trying to scare her off before she even unpacked. And normally it might have worked. She didn't know anything about children, didn't particularly want to learn, and had no illusions about her own maternal instincts. But she also had nowhere else to go. Where do I sleep? She asked. Lizzie's smile faltered. What? My room. Where is it? The children exchanged glances. Upstairs, Lizzie said slowly. End of the hall. Thank you. Nora headed for the stairs. That's it? Lizzie called after her. You're not going to introduce yourself properly? Tell us you're going to be our new mother? Nora paused on the bottom step. I'm not your mother. Your mother's dead. The words landed like stones. Sam flinched. Lizzie's face went white, then red. I'm just someone who lives here now, Nora continued quietly. Same as you. She climbed the stairs before either of them could respond. The room at the end of the hall was small and spare. A bed, a dresser, a window overlooking the fields. Someone had left a folded quilt on the mattress and a pitcher of water on the dresser. It was more than Nora had expected, more than she'd had in weeks. She sat on the bed and stared at her hands. They were shaking. She'd held herself together through the auction, through the ride, through meeting the children. But now, alone in this strange room, in this strange house, the reality of it crashed over her. She'd been sold. She was owned. This was her life now. Nora pressed her palms against her eyes and breathed until the shaking stopped. Dinner was a tense, silent affair. Daniel had disappeared into the barn shortly after their arrival and didn't emerge until dusk. When he finally came inside, dusty and tired, he washed his hands at the pump and sat at the head of the table without a word. Lizzie had made the meal, beans and cornbread, simple but edible. She served her father first, then Sam, then herself. She didn't serve Nora. Nora got up and served herself. They ate without speaking. The only sounds were forks scraping plates and the occasional creak of the house settling. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. Lizzie, Sam, this is Nora. She'll be staying with us. We know, Lizzie muttered. You'll treat her with respect. Yes, sir. Daniel's gaze shifted to Nora. You need anything? No. He nodded and returned to his meal. That was it. No introductions, no explanations, no welcome to the family. After dinner, Lizzie and Sam disappeared upstairs. Daniel went out to check the stock one more time, and Nora was left alone in the main room, surrounded by the remnants of someone else's life. She found herself drawn to the shelves. They were crammed with books, more books than she'd ever seen in one place outside of the general store. Novels, agricultural manuals, a worn Bible, poetry collections. One shelf held framed photographs. Nora picked one up carefully. A woman smiled out from the frame, young, pretty, with kind eyes and Lizzie's dark hair. She stood beside a younger Daniel, his arm around her waist, both of them looking at the camera like they knew something the rest of the world didn't. That's her. Nora startled and turned. Lizzie stood in the doorway, watching her. Your mother, Nora said. Yes. Nora set the photograph down gently. She was beautiful. She was everything, Lizzie's voice cracked. And you'll never be her. I know. Lizzie blinked, clearly expecting an argument. When none came, she frowned. Then why are you here? Because I have to be. That's a stupid reason. Maybe. Nora turned to face her fully. But it's the truth. They stood there, girl and woman, both trying to figure out what the other was made of. I'll make you leave, Lizzie said quietly, just like the others. You can try. I will. All right. Lizzie's frown deepened. Then she turned and stalked back upstairs, her footsteps heavy with frustration. Nora waited until she was gone, then sat on the sofa and let out a long breath. This was going to be harder than she thought. The first test came at dawn. Nora woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted upright, heart racing, and stumbled to the door. The hallway was hazy with it. thin gray smoke seeping up from downstairs. She flew down the steps, expecting to find the kitchen ablaze. Instead, she found Lizzie standing calmly by the stove, poking at a skillet full of burning eggs. "Oh," Lizzie said when she saw Nora. "Did I wake you?" The eggs were black, completely inedible, and Lizzie had clearly burned them on purpose. The stove was too hot, the pan positioned directly over the flame. Nora crossed the room and moved the skillet off the heat. The smoke began to dissipate. "You could have burned the house down," she said evenly. "But I didn't." Lizzie smiled. "I was just making breakfast." "No, you were testing me." "I don't know what you mean." Nora dumped the ruined eggs into the slop bucket and set the skillet in the wash basin. Then she turned to find Lizzie watching her with those sharp, calculating eyes. "If you want me to leave," Nora said, "you're going to have to try harder than that." Lizzie's smile faded. Nora opened the cupboard, found a fresh bowl of eggs, and started cracking them into a clean pan. "You want to help, or you want to stand there looking smug?" "I don't help. Suit yourself." Nora cooked the eggs properly, scrambled, with a bit of butter and salt, and had them ready by the time Daniel came in from the morning chores. Sam appeared a few minutes later, rubbing sleep from his eyes. They sat. They ate. Daniel glanced at Lizzie once, his expression unreadable, but said nothing. After breakfast, he pushed back from the table. "Nora, come with me." She followed him outside. The morning was cool and clear, the sun just starting to warm the fields. Daniel led her to the barn, where the bay horse from yesterday stood in a stall alongside several others. "You said you don't ride well," Daniel said. "That ends today." He saddled the bay, whose name, he explained, was June, and showed Nora how to mount properly, how to hold the reins, how to sit. His instructions were brief and practical, no wasted words. "June's steady," he said. "She won't bolt, but you need to be firm with her. She'll test you if she thinks you're uncertain." Nora climbed into the saddle, her legs awkward and tense. "Relax," Daniel said. "You're not going to fall." "You don't know that." "I do." He adjusted her foot in the stirrup. "You're scared, but you're not stupid. There's a difference." It was, Nora realized, the closest thing to a compliment he'd given her. They spent the next hour riding in circles around the corral. June was, as promised, steady and patient. By the end of it, Nora felt less like she was about to die and more like she might actually survive this. Daniel watched from the fence, arms crossed. When she finally dismounted, he nodded. "You'll do." "That's it?" "That's it." He took June's reins and led her back to the barn. "Tomorrow you'll ride out with me, see the property." "What about the children? They know how to fend for themselves." Nora thought about Lizzie's burning eggs. "I'm sure they do." The second test came that afternoon. Nora was sweeping the kitchen when she heard a crash from upstairs, followed by Sam's voice. "Lizzie, she's going to be so mad!" She climbed the stairs to find water pouring from beneath the bathroom door. "What happened?" she called. Silence. Nora pushed the door open. The bathtub was overflowing, water sloshing onto the floor and seeping into the hallway. Sam stood in the corner, looking guilty. Lizzie stood by the tub, arms crossed, defiant. "The drain's stuck," Lizzie said flatly. Nora waded into the bathroom and turned off the tap. Then she plunged her arm into the cold water, feeling for the drain plug. It wasn't stuck. It had been deliberately closed. She pulled the plug free and the water began to drain with a loud gurgle. "You're going to clean this up," she said. "No, I'm not." Lizzie lifted her chin. "You're the housekeeper. You clean." Nora straightened, water dripping from her sleeve. "I'm not the housekeeper. I'm someone who lives here, same as you. And when you make a mess, you clean it." "Make me." "I'm not going to make you do anything." Nora stepped past her, heading for the door. "But your father will be home soon, and when he sees this, he's going to ask what happened. You can either tell him you flooded the bathroom on purpose and refused to clean it, or you can tell him it was an accident and you took care of it. Your choice." She left them there and went back downstairs. 10 minutes later, she heard the sound of mops and rags and muttered cursing. When Daniel came in that evening, the floor was dry and the children were suspiciously quiet. He glanced at Nora. She said nothing. But the tests continued. Salt in the sugar bowl. Mud tracked deliberately across the clean floor. Nora's blankets hidden. Her boots moved. Small things, petty things, things designed to make her snap. But Nora didn't snap. She replaced the salt. She cleaned the floor. She found her blankets and her boots, and she didn't complain. Because she understood something the children didn't seem to realize. She'd already been broken, already been humiliated, already stood on a platform and been sold to strangers. This was nothing. After a week, the tests became less frequent. After 2 weeks, they stopped altogether. And on the 15th day, something changed. It was late afternoon. Daniel was out mending fences. Sam was playing with wooden horses by the fireplace. And Nora was in the kitchen, kneading bread dough and half listening to the child's murmured narrative about outlaws and sheriffs. Lizzie appeared in the doorway. She watched Nora work for a long moment, saying nothing. "What?" Nora finally asked. "Why didn't you leave?" Nora kept kneading. "Where would I go?" "You could run away." "To what?" "I have no money, no family, no skills anyone values." She shaped the dough into a rough loaf. "This is the best option I've got." "That's sad." "It's honest." Lizzie stepped closer, her expression thoughtful. "The others left because of me." "I know. You're supposed to be angry about that." "Why?" Nora dusted flour from her hands. "You're a child who lost her mother. Of course you're angry. Of course you're testing people. It would be strange if you weren't." Lizzie stared at her. "You're weird." "Probably. Can I help?" The question caught Nora off guard. "With the bread?" "If you want." Nora hesitated, then nodded. "Wash your hands first." Lizzie did, then came to stand beside her at the table. Nora handed her a portion of dough and showed her how to knead it. Push, fold, turn, repeat. They worked in silence for a while. Then Lizzie said, quietly, "She used to make bread every Sunday." Nora didn't have to ask who she was. "What else did she do?" Nora asked. And slowly, haltingly, Lizzie began to talk. She talked about her mother's garden, about how she sang while she cooked, about the stories she told at bedtime, about the way she braided Lizzie's hair and never pulled too hard. She talked about the day she got sick, about how fast it happened, about the fever and the coughing and the terror in her father's eyes. She talked about the morning she died, and Nora listened. She didn't offer platitudes, didn't say it would be okay, or that time heals all wounds, or any of the useless things people said when they didn't know what else to do. She just listened. When Lizzie finally fell silent, her cheeks were wet and her hands were covered in dough. "I miss her," she whispered. "I know," Nora said. "Does it get easier?" Nora thought of her own mother, dead 14 years, and it still hurt. "No," she said honestly, "but you get stronger." Lizzie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of flour across her face. Then she went back to kneading. That night, at dinner, Lizzie set a plate in front of Nora without being asked. It was a small thing, but it mattered, Daniel noticed. His eyes flicked between his daughter and Nora, surprise crossing his face before he schooled it back to neutral. After the children went to bed, he lingered in the kitchen while Nora washed the dishes. "What did you do?" he asked. "Nothing." "She gave you food?" "Yes." "She's never done that before." Nora dried a plate and set it on the shelf. "Maybe she just needed time." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, then, "The others tried to replace her mother, tried to step into that role like it was just a job to fill." "I'm not her mother." "No." He picked up a dish towel and started drying alongside her. "You're something else." They worked in silence, side by side, and Nora was aware of him in a way she hadn't been before. The way he moved, the way he smelled like hay and leather, the way his hands, rough and scarred, handled the dishes with unexpected care. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For staying." Nora didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing, but something warm unfurled in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. 3 weeks in, the ranch started to feel less like a prison and more like something. Not home, not yet, but not a battlefield either. Nora fell into a rhythm. She learned the shape of the days, early mornings, hard work, simple meals, quiet evenings. She learned the land, riding out with Daniel to check the stock, mend fences, move cattle. She learned the children, their moods and habits, and the particular ways they carried their grief. Sam warmed to her first, his natural sweetness winning out over his sister's influence. He started following Nora around, chattering about everything and nothing, asking endless questions. Why's the sky blue? I don't know. Why don't you know? Because I'm not a scholar. What's a scholar? Someone who knows why the sky is blue. He found this hilarious. Lizzie took longer, but slowly, incrementally, she softened. She started helping with chores without being asked. Started sitting with Nora in the evenings while Nora mended clothes. Started, occasionally, smiling. And Daniel watched. He didn't say much, he never said much, but Nora could feel his attention on her. Not invasive, just present, observing. Sometimes she'd catch him looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Confusion, maybe, or curiosity. Once, when she was struggling to lift a heavy water pail, he appeared at her elbow and took it from her without a word. Their fingers brushed, and she felt a jolt of something electric. He felt it too. She could tell by the way he stiffened, the way he turned away too quickly. Neither of them mentioned it. So, 4 weeks in, disaster struck. It started with Sam. He came down to breakfast looking pale and glassy-eyed. Nora noticed immediately. You feeling all right? She asked. My throat hurts. She pressed the back of her hand to his forehead. He was burning up. Go back to bed, she said gently. I'll bring you some water. Sam obeyed without argument, which told her exactly how bad he felt. By midday, Lizzie was sick too. By evening, both children were deep in fever, their small bodies racked with chills and coughing fits that sounded like they were tearing apart from the inside. Daniel stood in the doorway of Sam's room, his face ashen. It's the same, he said hoarsely. It's the same as... He couldn't finish. Nora understood. The same sickness that took his wife. It's not the same, she said firmly, though she had no way of knowing that. And even if it is, we're going to fight it. Daniel looked at her like she'd slapped him. You don't understand. When Marie got sick, you couldn't save her. I know. Nora stepped close enough to grip his arm. But you're not alone this time. His eyes searched hers, desperate and afraid. Tell me what to do, he said. And for the first time, Nora saw him not as a stoic rancher or a distant employer, but as a man on the edge of breaking. We keep them cool, she said. We keep them hydrated. We don't let the fever get too high, and we don't leave them alone. Daniel nodded. They got to work. The night stretched endlessly. Nora moved between the two rooms, sponging the children's burning skin with cool water, coaxing them to drink, changing sweat-soaked sheets. Daniel did the same, his movements mechanical but steady. Around midnight, Sam started hallucinating. Mama? He called out, his voice small and frightened. Mama, where are you? Daniel froze in the doorway. Nora went to Sam's bedside and took his hot little hand in hers. I'm here, sweetheart. I can't find her. I know, but you're safe. I'm scared. I know, but you're going to be all right. She stayed with him, holding his hand and murmuring reassurances until the fever dream passed and he slipped back into fitful sleep. When she looked up, Daniel was still in the doorway, staring at her with an expression of raw pain. Go check on Lizzie, she said softly. He did. Dawn came gray and cold. Sam's fever broke first. One moment he was burning, the next he was shivering, and then he fell into a deep, natural sleep. Nora nearly wept with relief. Lizzie's fever broke an hour later. By mid-morning, both children were sleeping peacefully, their breathing steady and their foreheads cool. Nora sat on the floor between their rooms, her back against the wall, so exhausted she could barely keep her eyes open. Daniel found her there. He slid down the wall to sit beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Thank you, he said quietly. You did as much as I did. No. His voice was rough. I was ready to give up. You wouldn't let me. Nora turned to look at him. His face was haggard, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and unshed tears. But there was something else there too, something she hadn't seen before. Gratitude. Respect. And maybe, just maybe, the beginnings of something more. I couldn't lose them, he said. Not them too. I know. They sat in silence, two people who'd been through hell together, holding the line against the dark. And when Daniel reached over and took her hand, Nora didn't pull away. She held on. The children slept for 14 hours straight. Nora checked on them every 30 minutes, terrified each time that she'd find them burning with fever again, but they stayed cool. Their breathing stayed steady. And slowly, the knot of fear in her chest began to loosen. She dozed in the chair between their rooms, never quite falling into real sleep, jerking awake at every small sound. Daniel had collapsed on the sofa downstairs sometime around dawn. She'd heard the creak of the old springs, and then nothing. When Sam finally woke, it was late afternoon and the light coming through his window was soft and golden. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then clearing as he looked around the room. "Nora?" His voice was rough, barely a whisper. She was at his bedside in seconds. "I'm here. I had bad dreams. I know, but they're gone now." He reached for her hand, his fingers weak but warm. "Did I almost die?" The question hit her like a fist. She wanted to lie, to tell him he just had a little cold, but those clear eyes deserved better. "You were very sick," she said carefully. "But you fought hard, and you won." Pa was scared. I could hear him even in the dreams. "Yes, he was scared." "Are you scared?" Nora stroked the damp hair back from his forehead. "Not anymore." Sam smiled, a small, fragile thing, and closed his eyes again. Within minutes, he was asleep, but this time it was the good kind, peaceful and healing. Across the hall, Lizzie stirred. Nora went to her and found the girl watching her from the bed, eyes sharp despite the lingering exhaustion. "Sam okay?" Lizzie asked. "He's fine, sleeping." "Good." Lizzie pushed herself up on her elbows, then grimaced. "Everything hurts." "That's normal. Your body just fought a war." "Did we win?" "You're alive, aren't you?" Lizzie sank back against the pillows. "I dreamed about Mama. She was standing in the doorway, but every time I tried to reach her, she got further away." Nora sat on the edge of the bed. She didn't know what to say to that, didn't know how to explain to a 10-year-old that grief never really leaves. It just changes shape. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "It's not your fault." Lizzie's voice was matter-of-fact. "Nothing's your fault. You didn't ask to be here." "Neither did you." "No." Lizzie looked at her directly. "But you stayed anyway, even though we were horrible to you. You were protecting yourselves." "That's a nice way of saying we were horrible." Nora almost smiled. "Fine. You were horrible. Are you going to leave now?" "Why would I leave now?" "Because it's going to get harder. We're not dying anymore, so we'll go back to being difficult. And you'll remember that you could run away and maybe find something better." The girl's logic was brutal and clear, and completely wrong. "I'm not leaving," Nora said. "You say that now." "I mean it." Lizzie studied her face for a long moment. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she nodded once and closed her eyes. "Okay. Okay. I believe you." She yawned. "Wake me if Sam needs anything." And just like that, she was asleep. Nora sat there for a moment, overwhelmed by the simple trust in those words. Then she stood, tucked the blanket around Lizzie's shoulders, and went downstairs. Daniel was awake, standing at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee in his hands. He didn't turn when she entered, but his shoulders tensed slightly. "They're both sleeping," she said. "Fevers are gone." His shoulders sagged with relief. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He turned to face her then, and she was struck again by how exhausted he looked. There were new lines around his eyes, gray stubble on his jaw. He looked like he'd aged a decade in 2 days. "I need to thank you," he said. "You already did. Not properly." He set the coffee cup down and ran a hand through his hair. "When Marie got sick, I didn't handle it well. I kept thinking if I just worked hard enough, prayed hard enough, wanted it enough, she'd get better. And when she didn't, He stopped, jaw working. "I blamed myself, thought I'd failed her." "You didn't fail anyone. I know that in my head, but knowing and believing are different things." He looked at her directly. "Last night, when the kids got sick, I felt it all coming back. The fear, the helplessness. I was ready to just give up, accept that this was how it was going to be. But you didn't give up, because you wouldn't let me." His voice roughened. "You just kept going, kept fighting, Like it never occurred to you to do anything else. Nora thought about the auction platform, about standing there while strange men bid on her future, about the choice she'd made to survive that moment and the next and the next. Giving up wasn't an option, she said simply. Daniel crossed the kitchen until he stood directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, the scar on his left cheekbone, the way his throat moved when he swallowed. I bought you because I needed help with the children, he said quietly. But you've done more than that. He struggled for words. You've brought something back to this house, something I thought died with Marie. What's that? Hope. The word hung between them, fragile and dangerous. Nora's heart was pounding. She should step back, should put distance between them, should remember that she was here because she'd been purchased, not chosen. But she didn't move. Daniel, she started. He reached up and touched her face, his rough palm cradling her cheek with surprising gentleness. I know what you're going to say, he murmured, that this isn't right, that you're here because you had no choice, that I shouldn't. I was going to say thank you. He blinked. What? Thank you. For giving me a place when I had nowhere to go? For treating me like a person instead of property? For trusting me with your children? She covered his hand with hers. You didn't have to do any of that. Yes, I did. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. Because you're not property, Nora. You never were. The law says different. To hell with the law. And then he kissed her. It was brief, tentative, like he was asking permission even as he took it. His lips were warm and slightly chapped, tasting of coffee and exhaustion and something that might have been desperation. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers. I'm sorry, he said hoarsely. I shouldn't have. Nora grabbed his shirt and pulled him back down. This kiss was different, harder, more certain. She poured everything into it, all the fear and relief and loneliness of the past weeks, all the careful walls she'd built starting to crumble. His arms came around her, solid and steady, and she let herself lean into him, let herself, for just a moment, be held. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. We should talk about this, he said. Probably. Figure out what it means. Yes, neither of them moved. Later? Nora whispered. Later, he agreed. A floorboard creaked upstairs. They sprang apart like guilty teenagers just as Sam appeared at the top of the stairs, clutching his blanket. I'm hungry, he announced. Daniel cleared his throat. I'll make something. You cook like you're trying to poison us, Nora said before she could stop herself. He shot her a look that was almost amused. Fair point. They fell into an easy rhythm, working around each other in the kitchen. Nora made soup while Daniel cut bread, their hands brushing occasionally, both pretending not to notice. Sam sat at the table, watching them with sleepy curiosity. You look different, he said. Different how? Daniel asked. I don't know. Less angry. Daniel's hand stilled on the bread knife. I wasn't angry. You were always angry, since Mama died. But now you're not. Sam tilted his head. Did something change? Nora kept her eyes on the soup, feeling heat creep up her neck. Maybe, Daniel said quietly. Good. Sam yawned. I like you better this way. Lizzie appeared a few minutes later, drawn by the smell of food. She was steadier on her feet than Sam, but still pale and fragile looking. She sat next to her brother and eyed the adult suspiciously. What? Daniel asked. Nothing. But her gaze kept flicking between them, calculating. They ate in companionable silence. The children managed half a bowl each before exhaustion won out again. Daniel carried Sam back upstairs while Nora helped Lizzie, who insisted she could walk but accepted the offered arm anyway. He kissed you, didn't he? Lizzie whispered as they climbed the stairs. Nora nearly tripped. What? Pa, he kissed you. You both have that look. What look? The look people get in books when they're being stupid about each other. We're not being stupid. Not yet, maybe. Lizzie stopped at her bedroom door. But you will be. Adults always are. That's very cynical for a 10-year-old. I'm wise beyond my years. She grinned, then turned serious. I don't mind, if you and Pa, whatever. I just don't want you to leave when it gets complicated. It's already complicated. Then it'll get more complicated. That's how these things work. Nora helped her into bed. When did you become an expert on adult relationships? I read a lot. Lizzie settled against the pillows. And I pay attention. People think kids don't notice things, but we notice everything. Clearly. So? Lizzie pressed. Are you going to leave when it gets messy? Nora thought about all the times she could have run in the past weeks, all the opportunities to slip away in the night, to head for a town where no one knew her, to start over somewhere else. She'd never seriously considered any of them. No, she said. I'm not going to leave. Promise? I promise. Lizzie nodded, satisfied, and closed her eyes. Good, because Sam really likes you, and I guess you're okay too. High praise. Don't let it go to your head. Nora smiled and left her to sleep. Downstairs, Daniel had poured himself a whiskey and was standing on the porch, staring out at the darkening fields. Nora joined him, wrapping her shawl tighter against the evening chill. They stood in silence for a while. Lizzie knows, Nora said finally. About us. Whatever this is. Daniel took a drink. That girl's too smart for her own good. She gets it from you. She gets it from Marie. I'm just stubborn. You're smart too. You just hide it behind the stubborn. He glanced at her, something soft in his expression. You've got me figured out, do you? Not even close, but I'm learning. He turned to face her fully, setting his glass on the porch rail. I meant what I said earlier. You're not property. I don't want you to think that what happened was me exercising some kind of ownership. I don't think that. Good. Because if you want to leave, if you ever want to leave, I won't stop you. I'll give you money, help you get settled somewhere else. Whatever you need. Nora felt something warm bloom in her chest. You'd let me go? Just like that? I'd hate it, but yes. Even though you paid for me? His jaw tightened. That was a business arrangement. This, he gestured between them. This is something else entirely. What is it? I don't know yet. He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. But I'd like to find out, if you're willing. Nora looked down at their joined hands. His were so much larger than hers, scarred and calloused from years of hard work. They should have felt foreign, threatening even. Instead, they felt steady. I'm willing, she said. Daniel pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her waist. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart. We're going to mess this up, he murmured into her hair. Probably. I haven't done this in a long time, and even when I did, I wasn't particularly good at it. I've never done it at all. He pulled back to look at her. Never? Never. My father drank away any prospects I might have had, and after he died, well, she shrugged. The auction wasn't exactly a romantic first encounter. No, Daniel said quietly. It wasn't. His hands tightened on her waist. If I could go back and change that day, buy you a different way, meet you under different circumstances, you can't. And I'm not sure I'd want you to. How can you say that? Because if things had been different, I wouldn't have met Sam and Lizzie. Wouldn't have been here when they needed me. Wouldn't have... She stopped, surprised by the truth of it. Wouldn't have found this. A broken-down ranch and a widower with 2 difficult children? A home. The word seemed to shake something loose in him. He kissed her again, slower this time, like he was trying to memorize the shape of her mouth, the taste of her, the way she fit against him. When they finally broke apart, the sky had gone fully dark and the first stars were appearing. You should sleep, Daniel said. You've been awake for 2 days. So have you. I'll sleep when the stock's checked. Let me help. You can barely stand. Neither can you. They argued about it for another minute before compromising. They'd check the stock together quickly, then both get some rest. The barn was warm and smelled of hay and horses. Daniel moved through the familiar routine efficiently, checking water, tossing feed, examining hooves. Nora helped where she could, learning the rhythm of it. When they finished, Daniel turned to find her leaning against a stall door, fighting to keep her eyes open. Come on, he said gently, guiding her back toward the house. You're dead on your feet. I'm fine. You're stubborn. I learned from the best. He smiled at that, a real smile that transformed his entire face. Nora realized she'd never seen him smile like that before. open and genuine and almost boyish. She wanted to see it again. Inside, they paused at the bottom of the stairs. Nora's room was at the end of the hall. Daniel's was on the first floor, off the kitchen. "Good night," she said. "Good night." Neither of them moved. "This is the part where we go to our separate rooms and pretend we're not thinking about each other," Nora said. "I'm not good at pretending." "Neither am I." Daniel cupped her face in his hands. "Soon," he said quietly, "when things are less complicated, when the children are stronger, when we've had time to figure out what this is." "Soon," she agreed. He kissed her forehead and stepped back. Nora climbed the stairs on shaking legs and collapsed into bed fully clothed. She was asleep before her head hit the pillow. She dreamed of steady hands and dark eyes and the feeling of being held. The next week passed in a strange golden haze. The children recovered slowly, gaining strength each day. Sam was up and running around by the third day, driving everyone crazy with his endless energy. Lizzie took longer, but by the end of the week, she was back to her sharp-tongued self. And through it all, Nora and Daniel circled each other carefully. They didn't kiss again. Didn't even touch, really, beyond the occasional accidental brush of hands. But the awareness was always there. Nora would catch him watching her while she worked. She'd feel the weight of his gaze and look up to find him staring, a question in his eyes that she couldn't quite answer yet. And she watched him too. Studied the way he moved, the way he spoke to the children, the way he handled the horses with firm gentleness. She started to see past the gruff exterior to the man underneath, a man who read poetry when he thought no one was looking, who sang off-key while he worked, who mourned his wife but was trying slowly to build something new. One evening, after the children were in bed, Daniel found her on the porch with a book. "What are you reading?" he asked. She showed him the cover. "Emily Dickinson. I found it on your shelf." "Marie's favorite." "I can put it back." "No." He sat beside her. She'd want it read. They sat in comfortable silence, Nora reading while Daniel whittled a piece of wood into some undefined shape. "Read one out loud," he said eventually. "What?" "A poem. Read one out loud." Nora flipped through the pages and found one that felt right. "Hope is the thing with feathers," she began, "that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all." Daniel's whittling slowed. She continued, "And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm." When she finished, Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "That was Marie's favorite," he said finally. "She used to say it was about survival, about finding the small things that keep you going when everything else falls apart." She sounds like she was wise. She was. He set down his whittling and looked at Nora. "She also would have liked you." "How can you know that?" "Because you're strong and kind, and you don't take any nonsense from the kids." He smiled slightly. "She always said those were the most important qualities in a person." Nora closed the book carefully. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Do you feel guilty about this? About us?" Daniel considered the question. "Sometimes. I love Marie. Still do, in a way. But she's gone. And I'm still here. And life keeps moving forward whether I want it to or not." He met her eyes. "I think she'd understand. She wasn't the type to want me to mourn forever." "What was she like? What was—" "Fierce, stubborn as hell, could outride most men and wasn't afraid to prove it." His voice softened with memory. "She laughed loud and loved harder. When she died, it felt like someone had torn out half my soul. I'm sorry." "Don't be. I got 15 good years with her. Got 2 incredible children. That's more than some people get in a lifetime." He reached over and took Nora's hand. "And now I'm getting something else. Something different, but no less valuable." "What's that?" "A second chance." Nora's throat tightened. "I'm not her." "I know, and I don't want you to be." He squeezed her hand. "I want you to be exactly who you are." "I don't even know who that is anymore." "Then we'll figure it out together." It was such a simple promise, such an impossible one. And yet, Nora believed him. They sat together until the stars came out, hands linked, neither needing to fill the silence with words. Inside, Lizzie watched from her bedroom window, a small smile on her face. The following Sunday, Daniel suggested they ride out to the north pasture to check on the spring calves. The children were well enough to be left alone for a few hours, and the weather was clear. Nora agreed, though she still wasn't entirely comfortable on horseback. They rode in companionable silence, the morning sun warm on their backs. The land rolled out in all directions, endless grass and sky and possibility. "It's beautiful," Nora said. "It's hard," Daniel corrected. "Beautiful, yes, but hard. Droughts and storms and animals that die for no reason. The land gives, but it also takes. Like everything else." "Like everything else," he agreed. They found the calves in a sheltered valley, fat and healthy. Daniel counted them while Nora watched, making notes in a small leather journal. "All accounted for," he announced. "No losses this spring." "That's good?" "That's damn near miraculous." They dismounted to let the horses graze. Daniel pulled some bread and cheese from his saddlebag, and they sat on a flat rock, eating and watching the calves stumble around on uncertain legs. "I never thought I'd end up here," Nora said suddenly. "On a ranch?" "Anywhere. When my father died, I thought my life was over. Thought I'd end up in some factory back east, or worse." She looked at him. "I never imagined this. Is it what you want? I don't know. I'm still figuring that out." She picked at the bread. "But it's not terrible." Daniel laughed. A real laugh that startled a bird from a nearby bush, of a high praise indeed. "I'm serious. I don't know what I expected. Someone cruel, maybe. Someone who would use me and discard me." "Is that what you thought I was?" "At first." She met his eyes. "You looked so hard on the auction platform, so cold. I thought you were buying me to... "I know what you thought." His jaw tightened. Half the men there were thinking exactly that. I could see it in their faces. "But not you." "No, not me." He took a breath. "I was desperate, but not that desperate. I needed help with the children, and you looked like you could handle yourself, that's all." "That's all?" "Well," a faint smile crossed his face, "you also looked like you wanted to murder everyone in that crowd, and I respected that." Nora surprised herself by laughing. "I did want to murder them." "I know, I could tell." He reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "That's when I knew you'd survive here, because you've got fight in you." "I've got stubbornness, there's a difference." "Not much of one." They finished eating and sat for a while longer, shoulders touching, watching the calves play. "Daniel?" Nora said eventually. "What happens next?" He knew what she was asking, not about the ranch or the children, but about them. "I don't know," he admitted. "I haven't done this dance in 20 years, and I wasn't particularly smooth then. So we're both stumbling blind." "Seems that way." Nora leaned her head against his shoulder. "At least we're stumbling together." Daniel wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. They sat like that for a long time, two people trying to build something new from broken pieces. When they finally rode back, the sun was high and hot. The children came running out to meet them, Sam full of questions about the calves, and Lizzie pretending not to care but listening intently anyway. That night, Nora made a roast and potatoes. The children set the table without being asked. Daniel opened a bottle of wine he'd been saving, and they ate like a real family. Afterward, Lizzie helped wash dishes while Sam practiced his letters at the kitchen table. Daniel sat with him, correcting his penmanship with patience Nora wouldn't have expected 2 months ago. "You're getting better," Daniel told his son. "Nora's been helping me," Sam said. Daniel glanced at Nora, something warm in his expression. "Has she?" "Every afternoon," Lizzie confirmed. "She's good at explaining things." "High praise from you," Daniel said. Lizzie shrugged. "She's all right," but she smiled when she said it. Later, when the children were in bed, Nora found herself back on the porch with Daniel. It was becoming their routine, these quiet evenings after the work was done, sitting together in the darkness. "They're good kids," Nora said. "They are. Thanks to you." "I didn't do anything special." "You stayed. That was special enough." Nora thought about that, about how such a simple act, just remaining when things got hard, could matter so much. "I'm glad I stayed," she said quietly. Daniel reached for her hand. "So am I." And there, under the vast Montana sky, With the house warm and lit behind them, and the future uncertain ahead, they held on to each other and let themselves hope. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after the children's illness. Nora was in the garden pulling weeds from between the potato plants when she heard the horses. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw 3 riders approaching from the east road. Visitors were rare out here. The ranch was 15 miles from town, and most people had better things to do than make social calls. Daniel emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. He watched the riders approach with the same wariness Nora felt. The lead rider was a woman, which surprised Nora. She sat her horse like she'd been born in the saddle, her posture straight and confident. She was perhaps 40, handsome rather than pretty, with steel gray hair pinned severely back. The 2 men flanking her looked like hired hands, rough and weathered and armed. They stopped in front of the house. The woman dismounted smoothly and handed her reins to one of the men. "Daniel Calhoun?" Her voice was crisp, educated. "That's right." Daniel's tone gave nothing away. "Can I help you?" "I'm Margaret Hendricks. I own the Triple H Ranch about 30 miles north of here." She paused, as if expecting recognition. When none came, she continued, "I'm also head of the Cattlemen's Association for this territory." "I know who you are," Daniel said. "What brings you all the way out here?" Margaret's eyes swept over the property. The house, the barn, the fields. When her gaze landed on Nora, still kneeling in the garden dirt, something calculating entered her expression. "I'm here about the auction," she said. Nora's stomach dropped. Daniel's face went carefully blank. "What about it?" "There's been a complaint about the circumstances of the sale." Margaret pulled a folded paper from her jacket. "According to territorial law, indentured contracts must be filed with the county within 30 days of purchase. Yours was not." "I wasn't aware of that requirement." "Ignorance of the law isn't an excuse, Mr. Calhoun." She handed him the paper. "This is a notice of investigation. There are questions about whether the transaction was legal, whether proper procedures were followed, whether the young woman entered the arrangement voluntarily." Daniel's jaw tightened as he read. "Who filed the complaint?" "That information is confidential." "Like hell it is. Mr. Calhoun, was it Hutchins? Carl Hutchins?" Margaret's expression didn't change, but she didn't deny it either. Daniel crumpled the paper in his fist. "That son of a—" "Regardless of who filed the complaint, the law is clear. If the contract isn't properly registered, the arrangement is void, which means—" She looked at Nora again. "The young woman would be free to leave, or to be placed in a more appropriate situation." Nora stood slowly, her heart pounding. "What does that mean, a more appropriate situation?" "It means," Margaret said, turning to address her directly, "that you have options. If you're being held against your will, if you're being mistreated in any way, there are resources available, legal protections." "I'm not being mistreated." "Are you sure? Because from where I'm standing, this looks like a vulnerable young woman being taken advantage of by a man with considerably more power and resources." Nora felt anger flare hot in her chest. "You don't know anything about my situation. I know what I see. And I see a girl who was sold at auction and is now living in isolation with a man twice her age." Margaret's voice softened, became almost kind. "I'm not trying to be cruel, dear. I'm trying to help you." "I don't need your help." "Don't you?" Margaret glanced at Daniel. "Or are you so dependent on him that you can't even imagine another life?" "That's enough," Daniel said quietly, but there was steel beneath the words. "Is it? Because I think we're just getting started." Margaret pulled another paper from her jacket. "This is a writ of removal. If you cannot produce a valid registered contract within 7 days, Miss Finch will be taken into protective custody and relocated to a situation deemed more appropriate by the territorial court." The words hit Nora like a physical blow. Taken. Relocated. Ripped away from the only stability she'd found in months. "You can't do that," she said. "I can. And I will, if necessary." Margaret's expression was firm. "My job is to ensure that contracts are being honored and that vulnerable individuals aren't being exploited. This situation raises red flags. The only red flag here is Carl Hutchins trying to cause trouble because his pride got bruised," Daniel snapped. "Perhaps, but the law doesn't care about pride. It cares about procedure." Margaret mounted her horse in one fluid motion. 7 days, Mr. Calhoun. Register the contract properly or lose it entirely." She wheeled her horse around and rode off, her men following. The three of them disappeared down the road in a cloud of dust. Nora and Daniel stood in silence, watching them go. "What just happened?" Nora asked finally. "Hutchins is trying to get revenge, and he found someone with the authority to make my life difficult." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, frustration radiating off him. "Damn it, I should have filed the paperwork immediately. I didn't think it mattered." "Does it matter, I mean?" He looked at her, and something complicated moved across his face. "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you want to stay." The question hung between them, sharp and unavoidable. Before Nora could answer, the kitchen door banged open and Sam came running out. "Who were those people?" he demanded. "No one important," Daniel said. "They looked important. They had official papers and everything." Sam tugged on his father's sleeve. "Are we in trouble?" "No, son. Everything's fine." But Lizzie appeared behind her brother, and her sharp eyes missed nothing. She looked from Daniel to Nora and back again. "Something's wrong," she said flatly. "It's nothing we can't handle," Nora told her. "That's what adults always say right before everything falls apart." She wasn't wrong. That night, after the children were finally asleep, Daniel and Nora sat at the kitchen table with the crumpled notice spread between them. "We need to talk about this," Daniel said. "I know. If I register the contract, it makes the arrangement official, legal. You'd be bound to stay here for—" He checked the original papers. 5 years. "And if you don't register it? Then in 7 days, Margaret Hendricks will show up with the territorial marshal and take you away." His hands clenched on the table. "They'll place you somewhere they deem appropriate, probably as a domestic servant for some wealthy family in town. Or worse, they'll send you back east to a factory or a workhouse." Nora's throat tightened. She'd heard stories about those places. Girls worked to death for pennies, living in cramped, disease-ridden quarters. "So my choices are stay here under contract or be taken away to somewhere worse." "Those aren't your only choices." Daniel met her eyes. "You could leave on your own, right now. I'd give you money, enough to get you somewhere safe. You could build a real life, not one forced on you by circumstance." "Where would I go?" "Anywhere you want. California, Oregon. Hell, back east if that's what you prefer." His voice was strained. "The point is, it would be your choice. Not mine. Not the court's. Yours." Nora stared at the paper. 5 years felt like forever. But the alternative, being ripped away from this place, from these children, from him, felt worse. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. Daniel was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. "I want you to stay. I want to register the contract and tell Margaret Hendricks and Carl Hutchins and everyone else to go to hell." He swallowed hard. "But I also want you to choose it. Not because you're trapped, but because you want to be here." "I do want to be here." "Do you? Or do you just not have anywhere else to go?" The question cut deep because it was fair. 6 weeks ago, Nora had stayed because she had no other option. But now things were different. "Both," she admitted. "I don't have anywhere else to go, but that's not the only reason anymore." "What's the other reason?" She looked at him, really looked at him, at the lines around his eyes, the gray in his hair, the way his hands were never quite still, at the man who'd bought her at auction but treated her like a person, who'd trusted her with his children, who'd held her through the long night when they fought death together. "You," she said simply. "And the children. And this place. It's become—" She struggled for the right word. "Home." Daniel's eyes closed briefly, like the word had hit him somewhere vital. "Then stay," he said. "Not because you're contracted to. Not because you have nowhere else to go. But because you choose it." "What about the contract?" "I'll register it. That'll satisfy the law and get Hendricks off our backs." He reached across the table and took her hand. "But between us, it doesn't mean anything. You're free to leave whenever you want. I won't hold you to it. That defeats the whole purpose of a contract. I don't care. I'm not going to trap you here with legal paperwork." Nora felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of fear she hadn't fully acknowledged until now. "Okay," she said. "Okay? Register the contract. Tell Hendricks we're in compliance. And I'll stay." She squeezed his hand. "Because I choose to." Daniel stood and pulled her up with him, wrapping his arms around her. She pressed her face against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Thank you," he murmured into her hair. "For what?" "For choosing this. For choosing us." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other against the uncertainty of what came next. The next morning, Daniel rode into town to file the paperwork. He took Lizzie with him, leaving Nora and Sam at the ranch. Sam was delighted to have Nora to himself. He dragged her around the property, showing her his favorite spots, the creek where he caught frogs, the hollow tree where he hid his treasures, the hill where you could see all the way to the mountains. "Lizzie never wants to do this stuff," he explained as they climbed the hill. "She says it's baby games." "Lizzie's just trying to act older than she is," Nora said. "She's always trying to act older, ever since Mama died." Sam picked up a stick and swished it through the tall grass. "Pa says she's carrying too much." "Your pa's probably right." They reached the top of the hill and sat on a flat rock. The view was spectacular. The ranch spread out below them, the cattle like small brown dots in the pasture, the mountains rising purple in the distance. "Do you like it here?" Sam asked suddenly.
"Yes. Really? You're not just saying that. Really?" He digested this. "Good, because I like having you here." "I like being here. Are you going to marry Pa?" The question was so unexpected that Nora nearly choked. "What? Are you going to marry him? Lizzie says you are. She says adults don't look at each other the way you and Pa do unless they're planning to get married. Lizzie needs to mind her own business." Is that a yes or a no? Nora didn't know how to answer that. She and Daniel hadn't talked about marriage, hadn't really talked about what they were doing at all, beyond the careful circling and the stolen moments. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Would you want to, if he asked?" "Sam, because I think you should. Then you'd be here forever and we'd be a real family again." He looked at her with those earnest, hopeful eyes. "We haven't been a real family since Mama died, but with you, it feels like we could be." Nora's throat tightened. "Sweetheart, you don't have to answer now," Sam said quickly. "I just wanted you to know. In case you were wondering if we wanted you to stay, we do." He jumped off the rock and started down the hill, leaving Nora sitting there with tears stinging her eyes. That evening, Daniel and Lizzie returned from town. Daniel looked exhausted, and there was a tightness around his mouth that suggested the trip hadn't gone smoothly. "Did you file the paperwork?" Nora asked. "Filed and registered. We're legal now." He dropped his hat on the table. "Hendricks can't do anything." "That's good." "Is it?" He looked at her. "Because the clerk made sure everyone in earshot knew what the paperwork was for. By tomorrow, the whole town will be talking about how Daniel Calhoun bought himself a wife at auction." "I'm not your wife." "They don't care about the distinction. All they'll see is a man twice your age who paid $200 for an 18-year-old girl." His voice was bitter. "The gossip is going to be ugly." "Let them talk. Easy to say when you don't have to go into town and face it." "Then I'll go into town with you next time. Let them say whatever they want to my face." Daniel shook his head. "You don't know what people are like, what they'll assume, what they'll say. I stood on an auction platform and let men bid on me like livestock." Nora cut him off. "I think I can handle some gossip." Lizzie, who'd been quietly listening, spoke up. "She's tougher than you think, Pa. I know how tough she is. That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" He struggled for words. "I don't want her to have to be tough. I don't want her to have to defend herself against vicious rumors because of a choice I made." "A choice we both made," Nora corrected. "I could have left. You gave me the option. I stayed. You stayed because you had nowhere else to go." "That's not true anymore, and you know it." They stared at each other across the kitchen, the tension thick enough to cut. Lizzie cleared her throat. "I'm going to check on Sam." She disappeared upstairs, leaving them alone. Daniel ran a hand over his face. "I'm sorry. I'm not angry at you. I'm angry at everything. At Hutchins for being a petty bastard, at Hendricks for showing up here with her judgments, at this whole damn situation. I know, and I'm angry at myself for putting you in this position, for not thinking through what it would mean, long term, to buy someone at an auction." Nora crossed the kitchen and took his hands. They were rough and warm, familiar now. "You gave me a home when I had nothing," she said quietly. "You treated me with respect when you could have treated me like property. You let me become part of your family.
So whatever people want to say about how this started, they don't know the truth of it. And what's the truth? The truth is complicated and messy and probably doesn't make sense to anyone but us. She looked up at him. But it's ours. Daniel pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. I don't deserve you. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. She felt him smile against her hair. They stood like that until Sam called down that he was hungry, and the moment broke, and they went back to being the people they needed to be. Responsible adults caring for children, running a ranch, surviving one day at a time. But that night, after everyone else was asleep, Nora found herself thinking about Sam's question. Would she marry Daniel if he asked? The answer should have been complicated. Should have involved weighing options, considering alternatives, thinking about what marriage would mean. But the truth was simpler than that. Yes, she would. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. She'd gone from being sold at auction to contemplating marriage in the span of 2 months. It was insane, reckless, exactly the kind of decision people would judge her for. And she didn't care, because for the first time in her life, she was choosing something for herself. Not because she had to, not because circumstances forced her, but because she wanted it. She wanted this man, this family, this life. The question was whether Daniel wanted the same thing. 3 days later, Margaret Hendricks returned. Nora was hanging laundry when she heard the horses. Her stomach sank. She'd hoped they were done with this. Daniel emerged from the barn, his expression dark when he saw who it was. Margaret dismounted, alone this time. Mr. Calhoun. Mrs. Hendricks. I've come to verify that the contract has been properly filed. It has. I'd like to see the documentation, if you don't mind. Daniel disappeared into the house and returned with the papers. Margaret examined them carefully, her expression giving nothing away. Everything appears to be in order, she said finally. Good. Then we're done here. Not quite. She folded the papers and handed them back. I'd like to speak with Miss Finch, privately. No. Mr. Calhoun, I'm required by law to verify that she entered this arrangement voluntarily and that she's being treated appropriately. That requires a private conversation. She's not going anywhere with you. I'm not asking her to leave the property, just to step aside for a few minutes. Margaret's tone was patient but firm. You can refuse, but then I'll have to report that you prevented me from fulfilling my legal obligations, which will raise more questions. Daniel's jaw worked. He looked at Nora. She nodded slightly. It's fine. It's fine, she repeated. I can handle this. He didn't look convinced, but he stepped back. Margaret gestured toward the garden. Shall we? Nora led her away from the house, stopping near the potato patch. From here, she could see Daniel standing by the barn, arms crossed, watching. How are you being treated? Margaret asked without preamble. Fine. That's a vague answer. It's an honest one. I'm treated fine. Margaret studied her face. Are you being fed adequately? Do you have your own quarters? Are you being forced into any intimate situations? I have my own room, I eat with the family, and no. No what? No to the intimate situations. Not that it's any of your business. It is my business, actually. That's why I'm here. Margaret's voice softened slightly. Look, I know you probably see me as the enemy, some busybody interfering in your life, but I've seen these situations go bad. I've seen young women trapped in arrangements they can't escape, being used and abused with no recourse. That's not what's happening here, isn't it? You were sold at auction. You have nowhere else to go. You're completely dependent on a man who paid for you. How is that not a recipe for exploitation? Nora felt anger flare. Because he's a good man. Because he treats me with respect. Because when his children were sick, we fought for them together. Because he offered to let me leave with money and resources, and I chose to stay. Did you? Or did you just choose the least terrible option available to you? What's the difference? The difference is freedom, real freedom, not just the illusion of choice. Margaret stepped closer. I can get you out of here. I can place you with a good family in town, people who will treat you as a valued employee, not as indentured labor. You'd have wages, independence, a chance to build your own life. I am building my own life here. Are you? Or are you just surviving his? The question hit harder than it should have, because wasn't that what Nora had been doing her whole life? Surviving other people's choices? Other people's mistakes? But this felt different. I know what people see when they look at this situation, Nora said quietly. They see a transaction. They see a girl with no options and a man with too much power. And maybe that's how it started. But it's not what it is now. Then what is it? Nora struggled for words. It's complicated and messy, but it's also real. The children need me. Daniel needs me. And She stopped. You what? I need them too. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentler than before. I had a daughter once. She was about your age when she married a man twice her age because she thought she had no other choice. He wasn't cruel exactly, but he wasn't kind either, and she spent 20 years in a marriage that slowly suffocated her. Margaret's eyes were distant. She died last year. Pneumonia, officially. But I think it was really just exhaustion. She'd spent so long being what everyone else needed that she forgot how to be anything for herself. I'm sorry. So am I. Margaret focused on her again. That's why I do this. Why I push and pry and make people angry, because I don't want to see other young women disappear into situations they can't escape from. I'm not disappearing. You say that now, but 5 years is a long time. And contracts have a way of extending themselves. Debts accrue. Obligations multiply. Before you know it, you've spent your whole life paying off someone else's investment. Nora wanted to argue, wanted to insist that this was different, that Daniel was different. But she couldn't shake the small voice in the back of her mind asking, what if Margaret was right? I appreciate your concern, she said finally, but I'm staying. Margaret sighed. All right. But if you ever change your mind, if you ever need help, you can get word to me through the Cattlemen's Association. They have an office in town. I won't need it. I hope you're right. Margaret started back toward her horse. Then she paused. One more thing. Carl Hutchins is still making noise, talking about how the auction was improper, how you should have been given other options. He's trying to stir up trouble. Why do you care what Hutchins thinks? I don't. But other people do. He's got friends, connections, and if he pushes hard enough, there could be another investigation. More questions. She met Nora's eyes. Just be prepared. She mounted her horse and rode off without another word. Nora stood in the garden, watching her go, feeling like she'd just survived an interrogation. Daniel appeared at her elbow. What did she say? She thinks I'm being exploited. She offered to relocate me. His face went pale. And I told her no. Nora turned to face him. But Daniel, she made some good points about power dynamics and dependency and you want to leave. No, that's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying? Nora took a breath. I'm saying that maybe we need to figure out what this is, what we are. Because right now it's undefined and complicated, and people are going to keep questioning it until we can give them a clear answer. What kind of answer are they looking for? I don't know, something that makes sense to them. Daniel's laugh was bitter. Nothing about this makes sense, not by conventional standards, but that doesn't make it wrong. I know that, you know that, but the world can go hang. He took her shoulders gently. I don't care what makes sense to other people. I care about what makes sense to us. And what does make sense to us? He looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes intense. I don't know yet, he admitted, but I know I want to figure it out. With you. Nora felt something settle in her chest. Not resolution exactly, but commitment. Okay, she said. Okay, let's figure it out together. Daniel pulled her close, and she went willingly, wrapping her arms around him and holding on tight. Behind them, Lizzie watched from the kitchen window, a small, satisfied smile on her face. Whatever came next, they'd face it as a family. Messy and complicated and imperfect as they were. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay in his bed on the first floor, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything Margaret Hendricks had said, about power dynamics and exploitation and young women trapped in situations they couldn't escape. Was that what he'd done to Nora? Trapped her? He told himself he was different from the other men at that auction, that he had noble intentions, that he needed help with the children and she needed a home, and it was a fair exchange. But fair didn't mean equal, and equal didn't mean right. Around midnight, he gave up on sleep and went to the kitchen. He was pouring himself a whiskey when he heard footsteps on the stairs. Nora appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "No." She crossed to the table and sat down. Daniel poured a second glass and slid it across to her. She took a small sip and made a face. "That's terrible. It's not meant to taste good. It's meant to help you stop thinking." "Is it working?" "Not remotely." They sat in silence for a while. The house creaked and settled around them. Outside, an owl called. "What are you thinking about?" Nora asked finally. "Hendrix. What she said about you being trapped here." "I'm not trapped." "Aren't you? You have a 5-year contract now, legally binding. If you tried to leave, I could have you brought back." "But you wouldn't." "No. But the fact that I could, that's the problem, isn't it?" He took a long drink. "I have all the power here, the land, the money, the legal authority. You have nothing. I have the children's trust. I have a place in this house. I have—" She stopped. "What?" "You," she said quietly. "I have you." Daniel's hands tightened on his glass. "That's not enough. Not when the relationship is built on such unequal ground. So what are you saying? That we should end this before it goes any further?" "I'm saying I don't know how to make this right. How to give you real choice when you're contractually obligated to be here." Nora was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "When I was 14, my mother died. My father started drinking seriously after that. By the time I was 16, we'd lost everything. The house, the shop, everything." She stared into her whiskey. "I spent 2 years watching him destroy himself, watching our lives fall apart, knowing there was nothing I could do to stop it. Nora, when he died and his creditors came, I thought that was it. I thought I'd end up in a factory, or worse. The auction felt like the final humiliation, the last proof that I had no control over my own life." She looked up at him. "But then you bought me, and you didn't treat me like property. You gave me work that mattered. You trusted me with your children. You offered me choices." Her voice strengthened. "For the first time in years, I felt like I had some say in what happened to me. Not complete control, not total freedom, but more than I'd had before." "That's a pretty low bar." "Maybe, but it's my bar, my life, my choices." She reached across the table and took his hand. "I know the situation isn't perfect. I know there's a power imbalance, but I'm not some helpless victim, Daniel. I'm capable of making my own decisions. Even when those decisions are limited by circumstance? All decisions are limited by circumstance. Rich or poor, free or bound, everyone's choices are shaped by their situation." She squeezed his hand. "The question isn't whether I have perfect freedom. It's whether I have enough freedom to choose authentically. And I do." Daniel wanted to believe her, but doubt gnawed at him. "What if you're wrong? What if 10 years from now you look back and realize you were trapped here? That you stayed because you felt like you had no other option? Then that's on me, not you." "That's not how it works." "Why not?" "Because I'm the one with the power, which means I'm the one responsible for how that power is used." Nora pulled her hand back, frustration flickering across her face. "You're so busy trying to be noble that you're not listening to what I'm actually saying." "I am listening." "No, you're projecting. You're so worried about being like the other men at that auction that you can't see that you're nothing like them." She stood up, pacing. "Those men looked at me and saw an object. You looked at me and saw a person. That matters." "Does it?" "When the end result is the same, you, here, bound by contract. The end result isn't the same because I chose this. Not the auction, not the contract, but this. You and me and the children and this life." She stopped pacing and faced him. "I'm not asking you to absolve yourself of responsibility. I'm asking you to trust that I know my own mind." Daniel stood and crossed to her. "I do trust you. But I also know how easy it is to convince yourself you're choosing something when you're really just making the best of a bad situation." "Is that what you think I'm doing?" "I think you're a survivor, and survivors are very good at adapting, at making themselves believe whatever they need to believe to get through the day." The words hung between them, sharp and cutting. Nora's eyes flashed. "You want to know what I believe? I believe I'm standing in a kitchen in the middle of the night arguing with a stubborn man who's trying to protect me from myself."
I believe I could walk out that door right now and you wouldn't stop me. I believe that somewhere in the past 3 months, this stopped being about contracts and obligations and became about something else entirely. What? You tell me. Daniel looked at her. Really looked at her. At the woman who'd survived an auction and won over his hostile children and fought death beside him in the long night. At the woman who made his house feel like a home again. At the woman he was falling in love with. The realization hit him like a blow to the chest. He was falling in love with her. Maybe he had already fallen, and that terrified him more than anything else. I can't do this, he said hoarsely. Nora went still. Can't do what? This. Us. I can't. He ran a hand through his hair. You deserve better than a broken-down rancher with 2 difficult children and a past he can't escape. That's not your decision to make. Isn't it? I'm the one who put you in this position? No, circumstances put me in this position. You just offered me a way forward. She stepped closer. And now you're trying to take that away because you're scared. I'm not scared. You're terrified. I can see it in your eyes. Her voice softened. You're terrified that if you let yourself care about me, you'll lose me the way you lost Marie. That you'll fail again. The words cut too close to the truth. Daniel turned away, unable to face her. Marie's death almost destroyed me, he said quietly. I don't know if I could survive that again. So what? You're just going to push me away before you get too attached? I'm trying to protect both of us. From what? Happiness? Nora moved around to face him. Daniel, I've been unhappy my whole life. I know what it looks like, what it feels like. This isn't that. This is messy and complicated and uncertain, but it's not unhappy. Not yet. Maybe not ever. You don't know what the future holds. Exactly, and that's what scares me. Nora reached up and cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. Listen to me. I am not Marie. I'm not going to die and leave you alone with your grief. I'm here. I'm real. I'm standing in front of you, choosing you, and you're so busy being noble and self-sacrificing that you can't see it. Nora, shut up. She pulled his face down to hers and kissed him. It was fierce and demanding and left no room for doubt. Daniel's resistance crumbled. He wrapped his arms around her and kissed her back with all the pent-up longing and fear and hope he'd been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nora kept her hands on his face. I love you, she said. I know it's too soon and too complicated and probably a terrible idea, but I love you anyway. Daniel's heart stuttered. You don't mean that. Yes, I do. You barely know me. I know you take care of your children even when it breaks your heart. I know you read poetry when you think no one's watching. I know you're kind and stubborn and scared of losing people. She smiled slightly. I know enough. This is insane. Probably. We've only known each other 3 months. And people will talk. They'll say terrible things about both of us. Let them. Daniel stared at her, at this impossible woman who'd walked into his life at its lowest point and somehow made it bearable again. I love you too, he said, the words rough and unpracticed. I've been trying not to, but I do. Nora's smile was radiant. Was that so hard? Terrifying, actually. She laughed and kissed him again, softer this time. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet kitchen, the world reduced to just the 2 of them. Then a floorboard creaked upstairs. They sprang apart. Daniel moved to the stairs and looked up, but the hallway was dark and empty. One of the kids? Nora whispered. Maybe, or just the house settling. But when he climbed the stairs to check, he found Lizzie's door slightly ajar. He pushed it open carefully. Lizzie was in bed, eyes closed, breathing steady. But Daniel had the distinct impression she'd been awake moments before. He pulled the door shut and went back downstairs. False alarm? Nora asked. I don't know. Lizzie might have been listening. If she was, she already knows everything anyway. That girl misses nothing. True? Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. We should talk about what this means, about how we handle it with the children. Tomorrow, Nora said. Tonight, let's just... She gestured helplessly. Just what? Let's just be 2 people who love each other. We can figure out the rest later. Daniel pulled her close again. That sounds good.
They stood together until the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky. Then they separated reluctantly, Nora heading upstairs to her room and Daniel to his, both knowing that sleep was unlikely, but feeling lighter than they had in weeks. In her room, Lizzie lay awake, smiling in the darkness. The next morning came too early and too bright. Nora woke to Sam shaking her shoulder. "You're late," he announced. "Breakfast isn't ready, and Pa's already out with the cattle, and Lizzie said I should wake you, but be gentle about it, so I'm being gentle." "Very gentle," Nora mumbled, sitting up. Her head felt fuzzy from lack of sleep, but her heart felt surprisingly light. "I'll be down in a minute." Sam bounded out. Nora dressed quickly and headed downstairs, where she found Lizzie already cooking eggs. "I can do that," Nora said. "I know. But you look tired, so I started." Lizzie glanced at her sideways. "Late night?" "Couldn't sleep." "Mm-hmm." Nora studied the girl's face. "Did you hear anything last night?" "Like what?" "Like anything." Lizzie's expression was perfectly innocent. "I was asleep. What would I have heard?" "Nothing. Never mind." But as Nora took over the cooking, Lizzie leaned close and whispered, "I think it's about time, for what it's worth." "You two have been dancing around each other for weeks." Nora's hand stilled on the spatula. "Lizzie, don't worry. I won't say anything to Sam. He's too young to be subtle about it." She grabbed plates from the cupboard. "But I'm glad. Pa's been different since you came, better." "He's still the same person." "No, he's not. He's more like he used to be, before Mama died." Lizzie set the plates on the table. "I wasn't sure if I'd ever see him like that again." The simple honesty of it made Nora's throat tight. "I'm not trying to replace your mother." "I know, and I'm glad you're not trying. That would be weird and wrong." Lizzie met her eyes. "But I'm also glad you're here. Both things can be true at the same time." Nora reached out and squeezed the girl's shoulder. Lizzie tolerated it for a moment before squirming away. "Eggs are burning," she said. They weren't, but Nora turned back to the stove anyway. When Daniel came in for breakfast an hour later, dusty and tired, his eyes found Nora's immediately. Something passed between them. Acknowledgement, question, promise. Sam chattered through the meal about a frog he'd found. Lizzie ate quietly, watching the adults with knowing eyes. And Nora and Daniel tried to act normal while being hyper-aware of each other's every movement. After breakfast, Daniel pulled Nora aside while the children cleared the table. "We need to talk about last night," he said quietly. "I know. About what it means. About how we move forward. I know. And about—" He stopped. "About getting married." Nora's heart stopped. "What? If we're doing this, if we're really doing this, we should do it right. Not some undefined arrangement that people can question and judge. A real marriage." "Daniel, you don't have to—" "I want to. I've been thinking about it all morning." He took her hands. "I know it seems fast. I know people will talk regardless. But I also know that I love you and I want you in my life, and the best way to make that clear to everyone, including the children, is to marry you." Nora's head was spinning. "This is because of what Hendrik said, about power dynamics, and it's not just that. It's also because I want to." He searched her face. "But only if you want to. This isn't an order or an expectation. It's a question. You're asking me to marry you?" "Yes. While I'm contractually obligated to stay here for 5 years. The contract doesn't matter. You said so yourself. You're staying because you choose to, not because you have to. But other people won't see it that way." "Then we'll prove them wrong." His voice was firm. "We'll build a real marriage, a real partnership, and eventually the contract will expire and you'll still be here because you want to be, and everyone will have to accept that we chose each other." It made a strange kind of sense. Twisted and complicated, but genuine. "What about the children?" Nora asked. "They already think of you as part of the family. Making it official would just confirm what they already know." "And what about you? Are you ready for this? It's only been a year since Marie died." Pain flickered across his face. "I'll never stop loving Marie, but she's gone, and I'm still here, and I'm allowed to want to be happy again. She would have wanted that." Nora studied his face, the lines around his eyes, the gray in his hair, the vulnerability he was trying to hide. "Ask me properly," she said. "What?" "If you're going to ask me to marry you, do it properly." Daniel looked flustered for a moment.
Then he dropped to one knee, right there in the kitchen, still holding her hands. "Nora Finch," he said, "will you marry me?" She looked down at him, this man who'd bought her at auction and given her a home, who'd trusted her with his children, who'd admitted he was terrified of losing her. "Yes," she said. "I'll marry you." Relief flooded his face. He stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. From the doorway, someone cleared their throat. They sprang apart to find both children staring at them. "Are you getting married?" Sam asked. Daniel looked at Nora. She nodded. "Yes," he said. "We're getting married." Sam's face split into a huge grin. "Really? You're going to be our actual mother?" "Stepmother," Nora corrected. "Your real mother was Marie." "But you'll stay forever?" "I'll stay forever." Sam whooped and ran to hug her. Nora caught him, laughing, and looked over his head at Lizzie. The girl was smiling, a small, genuine smile. "Congratulations," she said. "Are you okay with this?" Nora asked. Lizzie shrugged, trying for casual and not quite making it. "I figured it was coming. You two aren't exactly subtle." "That's not an answer." "Fine. Yes, I'm okay with it." Lizzie's voice softened. "I'm more than okay with it." Daniel pulled both children into a group hug, and Nora found herself in the center of it, surrounded by this strange, damaged, perfect family. For the first time since standing on that auction platform, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be all right. The wedding planning happened quickly, mostly because there wasn't much to plan. Daniel wanted to do it at the ranch, just family and maybe a few close neighbors. Nora agreed, relieved not to have to face the town's gossip any sooner than necessary. They set the date for 3 weeks out, long enough to be somewhat respectable, short enough that they wouldn't lose their nerve. Lizzie threw herself into preparations with surprising enthusiasm. She insisted on making a cake, though her baking skills were questionable at best. She picked wildflowers for bouquets. She even offered to let Nora wear the dress Marie had worn at her wedding. "Are you sure?" Nora asked, holding the dress carefully. It was beautiful, simple white cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. "Mama would want it worn," Lizzie said. She hated the idea of things going to waste. Nora tried it on. It fit almost perfectly, just a little loose in the waist. "We can take it in," Lizzie said, already grabbing pins. "I know how to sew." They spent an afternoon together, Lizzie pinning and Nora standing still, both carefully not talking about what it meant for Nora to wear Marie's dress. Sam, meanwhile, practiced his letters so he could sign the marriage certificate as a witness. He took the responsibility very seriously, writing his name over and over until it was legible. Daniel arranged for the circuit preacher to come out. The man was old and half-blind and didn't ask too many questions about the circumstances of their courtship. And Nora tried not to think about Carl Hutchins or Margaret Hendricks or anyone else who might have opinions about what they were doing. She failed at that last part. 2 days before the wedding, she was in the garden when she heard horses again. Her stomach dropped, expecting Hendricks. Instead, it was a single rider, a woman Nora didn't recognize. She was young, maybe 25, dressed practically and riding confidently. "Help you?" Nora called. The woman dismounted. "I'm looking for Nora Finch, so—" "That's me. I'm Sarah Chen. I work with Margaret Hendricks at the Cattlemen's Association." She pulled an envelope from her saddlebag. "She asked me to deliver this." Nora took the envelope warily. "What is it?" "I don't know. She just said it was important you receive it before your wedding." Sarah remounted and rode off before Nora could ask any more questions. Nora stood in the garden staring at the envelope. Part of her wanted to burn it unopened. The other part needed to know what Hendricks had to say. She opened it. Inside was a short letter in neat handwriting. "Miss Finch, I've heard about your upcoming marriage. I hope it's what you truly want and not simply the path of least resistance. Enclosed are the names and addresses of 3 women's organizations that assist young women in difficult situations. If you ever need help, if the marriage becomes untenable, if you find yourself trapped, if you simply need resources to start over somewhere else, these people will help you. No questions asked. I still believe you deserve better than what you've been given. But I also understand that sometimes we have to make the best of the hands we're dealt. Good luck. I hope I'm wrong about everything. Margaret Hendricks." Nora read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket. She didn't know whether to be insulted or touched. Probably both.
That evening, she showed it to Daniel. He read it in silence, his expression darkening. She still thinks I'm exploiting you. She thinks she's protecting me. From what? From being happy? From making a mistake. Nora took the letter back. She lost a daughter to a bad marriage. She's trying to prevent that from happening to someone else. By assuming the worst about me. By assuming the worst about the situation. There's a difference. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Do you think she's right, that you're making a mistake? No? You answered that very quickly, because I'm sure. Nora met his eyes. I know what I'm doing, Daniel. I'm going into this with my eyes open. Are you? Because sometimes I wonder if you're just so used to surviving that you've convinced yourself this is what you want. We're back to this again. We never left it. Not really. He ran a hand through his hair. What if Hendrix is right? What if 10 years from now you look back and realize you settled for this because you thought you had no other choice? Then I'll deal with it 10 years from now. But I can't live my life based on what-ifs and maybes. She took his hand. I'm choosing you, now, today. That's all I can offer. Daniel pulled her close. It's enough, he said quietly. It has to be enough. But Nora could hear the doubt in his voice. The day before the wedding, they rode into town for supplies. It was Nora's first time back since the auction, and the moment they arrived, she felt the weight of stares. People whispered as they passed, pointed. A few women turned their backs deliberately. In the general store, the proprietor barely looked at Nora while taking her order. When Daniel stepped away to look at tools, the man leaned across the counter. You sure about this, miss? He asked quietly. Marrying a man who bought you? I'm sure. Because there are other options. The church helps young women in difficult situations. You don't have to. I said, I'm sure. The man backed off, but the judgment in his eyes remained. They finished shopping in tense silence. As they loaded the wagon, Carl Hutchins appeared. Well, well, he drawled, if it isn't the happy couple. Daniel's jaw tightened. Hutchins. Heard you two are getting married. That's quite the romance, from auction block to altar in 3 months. Walk away, Carl. Or what? You'll have me arrested? On what grounds? Hutchins grinned nastily. I'm just making conversation, congratulating you on your upcoming nuptials. You filed a false complaint with the Cattlemen's Association. Nothing false about it. The contract wasn't filed properly. That's a fact. It is now. So I heard. Convenient timing, don't you think? Right before you announce your engagement. Hutchins looked at Nora. Tell me, miss, did he give you a choice, or did he just tell you marriage was the next step in your contract? That's enough, Daniel said dangerously. I'm just asking questions, making sure this young lady knows she has rights, that she doesn't have to marry a man twice her age just because he bought her. Nora had been silent through the exchange, but now she stepped forward. Mr. Hutchins, she said calmly, I appreciate your concern for my welfare, but I assure you I'm marrying Daniel by choice, not coercion. Is that so? And what choice did you have, really? Stay and marry him or break the contract and be taken away by the territorial court? Those weren't my only options. No? What were the others? That's none of your business. Hutchins' expression hardened. Everything that happens in this territory is my business. I'm on the town council. I have a responsibility to ensure that laws are being followed and that vulnerable people aren't being taken advantage of. Then perhaps you should focus on actual problems instead of manufacturing them to soothe your wounded pride. The words were out before Nora could stop them. Hutchins' face went purple. My pride has nothing to do with this. Doesn't it? You bid on me at that auction. You wanted to buy me. And when Daniel outbid you, you decided to make trouble for him. Nora's voice was steady. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Not my welfare, your ego. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I was there. I saw your face when you lost. She stepped closer. I'm not a prize to be won, Mr. Hutchins. I'm a person, and I've made my choice. You need to accept that. For a moment, Hutchins looked like he might explode. Then he spun on his heel and stalked away, muttering curses. Daniel stared at Nora. That was stupid? I was going to say impressive. He deserved it. He did, but he's also vindictive. He'll make trouble for us now. He was already making trouble. Nora climbed into the wagon. At least now he knows where I stand. They rode back to the ranch in silence. Nora tried not to think about the stares, the whispers, the clear disapproval of half the town. This was her life now. She needed to get used to it. That night she couldn't sleep again. She went downstairs and found Daniel on the porch, as she'd known she would. "Second thoughts?" she asked, sitting beside him. "About 1,000 of them." "Want to call it off?" "No. You?" "No." They sat together, looking out at the dark fields. "It's going to be hard," Daniel said. "People will always question why you married me, always assume the worst." "I know." "You'll be judged for it, whispered about, maybe shunned." "I know." "And that doesn't scare you?" Nora thought about it. "It does, but not as much as the alternative." "Which is?" "Being alone. Being without you and the children. Being without this." She gestured at the ranch, the house, everything. "I've been alone most of my life, Daniel. I know what that feels like. This is better." He reached for her hand. "Even with all the complications?" "Even with all the complications." They sat like that until dawn, holding hands, facing the uncertain future together. Tomorrow, she would become Nora Calhoun. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, she would choose her own life, and that made all the rest of it worthwhile. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the kind of Montana day that made you forget winter existed. Nora woke before sunrise, her stomach twisted in knots. She lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling, trying to process the fact that by sunset she'd be married. She'd gone from being sold at auction to becoming a wife in less than 4 months. The absurdity of it wasn't lost on her. Downstairs, she found Lizzie already awake, mixing batter for the wedding cake. "You should be sleeping," Nora said. "So should you." Lizzie didn't look up from her mixing. "But here we both are." Nora poured herself coffee and sat at the table. "Nervous?" "About what?" "Today, me marrying your father." Lizzie was quiet for a moment, concentrating on getting the lumps out of the batter. "A little," she admitted finally. "It feels like we're closing a door. On Mama, on the way things were. We're not closing a door on your mother. She'll always be part of this family." "I know. In my head, I know that." Lizzie set down the spoon. "But my heart keeps saying that if Pa's happy with you, it means he's done being sad about her. And if he's done being sad, does that mean she didn't matter as much as I thought?" The raw honesty of it made Nora's chest ache. She got up and went to stand beside the girl. "Your mother mattered more than anything," she said quietly, "and your father will never stop grieving her. But grief and love aren't the same as being paralyzed by loss. He's allowed to move forward and still carry her with him." "How do you know?" "Because I watched my father destroy himself after my mother died. He loved her so much that when she was gone, he couldn't figure out how to keep living, so he just stopped trying." Nora's voice roughened. "I don't want that for your father. I don't want him to spend the rest of his life trapped in the past." Lizzie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of flour across her face. "Do you think Mama would like you?" "I hope so. I think she would. You're tough. She liked tough people." Lizzie picked up the spoon again. "She would have liked that you stood up to Hutchins yesterday. She hated bullies. Your father told me she could outride most men. She could outride all of them. She won a race against 3 ranch hands once, riding side saddle in a dress." Pride filled Lizzie's voice. She was the best rider in the territory. They spent the next hour working together, Lizzie on her cake and Nora preparing food for the small gathering. Sam wandered down eventually, sleepy-eyed and excited. "Is it time yet?" he asked. "Not for several hours," Nora told him. "That's too long. Can we make it sooner?" "That's not how time works." He sighed dramatically and flopped into a chair. "Today's going to take forever." He wasn't wrong. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Daniel spent the morning doing chores with an intensity that suggested he was working off nerves. The few neighbors they'd invited started arriving around noon. The Petersons from the adjacent ranch, old Mr. Hadley, who'd helped Daniel build the barn, and the widow Morrison who'd brought food when Marie died. No one from town came. Nora tried not to feel the sting of that. The preacher arrived at 2, his wagon creaking up the road. He was exactly as Nora remembered from the arrangement meeting, ancient, half-blind, and completely unbothered by the unconventional nature of the marriage. "You're the young lady, then," he said, peering at her. "Daniel said you were pretty. He wasn't wrong." Thank you. You sure about this? Marrying a widower with 2 children and a struggling ranch? I'm sure. Good. Because marriage is hard work even under the best circumstances. Under these circumstances, he shook his head. You'll need to be certain. I am. Then let's get you married. At 3 o'clock, Nora went upstairs to change into Marie's dress. Her hands shook as she buttoned it, and she had to try 3 times to get her hair pinned properly. There was a soft knock on the door. Come in, she called. Lizzie entered carrying a small box. I wanted to give you something. Before, she opened the box. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a small pendant, a bird in flight. It was Mama's, Lizzie said. Her mother gave it to her on her wedding day, and now I'm giving it to you. Nora's throat closed. Lizzie, I can't. Yes, you can. Mama would want you to have it. Lizzie's voice was firm. She believed in fresh starts, in second chances, in building new things from broken pieces. She gestured at the dress, the necklace, the whole situation. This is exactly the kind of thing she would have supported. She fastened the necklace around Nora's neck. It sat cool against her skin, a tangible connection to the woman whose space she was stepping into. Thank you, Nora whispered. Lizzie nodded, blinking hard. Then she turned and left quickly, before either of them could start crying. Nora stood in front of the small mirror, looking at herself in another woman's dress, wearing another woman's necklace, about to marry another woman's husband. It should have felt wrong. Instead, it felt like coming home. The ceremony was held in the front yard, under the big cottonwood tree. Someone had strung wildflowers from the branches, and the afternoon light filtered through the leaves in dappled patterns. Daniel stood waiting, cleaned up and wearing his best suit. When he saw Nora, his expression did something complicated, joy and grief and wonder all mixed together. She walked toward him slowly, acutely aware of everyone watching, the neighbors, the children, the preacher. When she reached Daniel, he took her hands. They were shaking slightly. You look beautiful, he said quietly. So do you. The preacher cleared his throat. Shall we begin? The ceremony was simple and short, traditional vows, no embellishments. When it came time for the rings, Daniel pulled out 2 simple gold bands. They were my parents, he explained. I hope that's all right. It's perfect. He slipped the smaller ring onto her finger. It fit almost perfectly. When Nora put the larger ring on Daniel's finger, she noticed his hands were still trembling. By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, the preacher said, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Daniel cupped her face gently and kissed her. It was brief and chaste, appropriate for the audience, but Nora felt it all the way to her toes. When they broke apart, the small gathering applauded. Sam whooped. Lizzie smiled through tears. The neighbors clapped politely. And just like that, Nora Finch became Nora Calhoun. The celebration afterward was modest but warm. The widow Morrison had brought a roast. Mr. Hadley contributed whiskey. The Petersons brought fresh bread and butter. Lizzie's cake was lopsided and slightly burned on one side, but it tasted fine and everyone ate it without complaint. As the sun began to set, the guests prepared to leave. Mrs. Morrison pulled Nora aside. I won't pretend to understand how this all came about, she said bluntly. But I've known Daniel since he and Marie moved here 15 years ago. He's a good man. He loved that woman with everything he had, and her death nearly killed him. I know, but he's choosing to live again, to try again. That takes courage. Mrs. Morrison squeezed Nora's hand. Be patient with him, with all of them. Grief doesn't follow a schedule. I will. And take care of yourself too. Don't lose who you are trying to fit into someone else's shape. Nora nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure who she was anymore. The girl who'd been sold at auction felt like a different person from the woman who'd just gotten married. Maybe that was the point. After the guests left, the 4 of them sat on the porch in the cooling evening. Sam was practically vibrating with excitement. Does this mean we can call you Ma now? He asked. Nora and Daniel exchanged glances. You can call me whatever feels right, Nora said carefully. Ma, Nora, whatever you prefer. I like Ma. Sam tried it out. Ma. Yeah, that sounds good. Lizzie was quieter. I think I'll stick with Nora, she said, if that's okay. That's more than okay. But I also think, Lizzie paused, choosing her words, I think it's okay if Sam calls you Ma. Mama would understand. She wouldn't want him to go without a mother just because she's not here. The generosity of that statement, from a 10-year-old still deep in her own grief, was almost overwhelming. Daniel put an arm around his daughter. Your mother would be proud of you. I hope so. They sat together as darkness fell, the new family trying to figure out how to fit together. The next morning, Nora woke in her same room, in her same bed, but everything felt different. She was married now, a wife, a stepmother. The weight of it settled on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. Downstairs, she found Daniel already making coffee. They moved around each other carefully, both hyper-aware of their new status. Sleep well? He asked. Not really. You? Not at all. They smiled at each other, awkward and uncertain. So, Nora said, what happens now? Now we figure out how to be married, I suppose. Any ideas on how to do that? Not a single one. They both laughed, tension breaking slightly. Over the next few weeks, they developed a new rhythm. It wasn't smooth or easy. They argued about small things, how to manage the household budget, whether to expand the herd, how much freedom to give the children. But they also learned each other's patterns. Daniel liked his coffee black and hot. Nora preferred hers with cream. He woke at dawn without fail. She was useless before sunrise. He was quiet when troubled. She talked through her problems. The children adjusted in their own ways. Sam took to calling Nora Ma with enthusiasm, sometimes even forgetting that she hadn't always been there. Lizzie remained more reserved, calling her Nora and maintaining a slight distance, but there was affection in it now instead of hostility. One afternoon, about a month after the wedding, Nora rode into town alone. She needed fabric for new curtains, and Daniel was busy with a broken fence. The moment she entered the general store, conversation stopped. Women she didn't know stared openly. A few whispered behind their hands. Nora held her head high and approached the counter. The proprietor's wife served her, tight-lipped and disapproving. Mrs. Calhoun, she said, making the name sound like an accusation. Mrs. Henderson. I heard you married Daniel. Very quickly, wasn't it? Quick enough. Surprising, given the circumstances of your arrival here. Nora met her eyes steadily. Is it? I needed a home. He needed help. We found a solution that worked for both of us. A convenient solution. A practical one. Mrs. Henderson sniffed. Well, I'm sure you'll be very happy, though I can't imagine what you have in common with a man twice your age. Maybe you should try harder, Nora said coolly. Imagination is a valuable skill. She paid for her fabric and left, feeling the weight of judgment on her back. Outside, she nearly ran into Carl Hutchins. Mrs. Calhoun, he said, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy. How's married life treating you? Well enough. That's good, real good. He stepped closer. I suppose you think you've won, got yourself a husband, a home, security. I wasn't aware it was a competition. Everything's a competition, Mrs. Calhoun. And you might have won this round, but people have long memories in small towns. They're not going to forget how this started. Then I'll just have to give them something new to remember. She walked past him to where her horse was tied. You know what I think? Hutchins called after her. I think you'll get bored. I think in a year or two you'll realize you married an old man with a failing ranch and 2 damaged children, and you'll wonder what the hell you were thinking. Nora turned back. You know what I think, Mr. Hutchins? I think you're bitter because you wanted something you couldn't have, and now you're trying to make everyone else as miserable as you are. I'm trying to be realistic. No, you're trying to be cruel. There's a difference. She mounted her horse and rode away, refusing to look back. But his words nagged at her during the ride home. Would she get bored? Would she regret this choice? She was still young. She could have a whole different life if she wanted it. When she reached the ranch, she found Daniel in the barn, doctoring a sick calf. He looked up when she entered. How was town? About as welcoming as expected. He grimaced. That bad? I ran into Hutchins. He had some opinions about our marriage. I'm sure he did. Daniel returned his attention to the calf. What did he say? That I'd get bored. That I married you for security and would eventually regret it. Daniel's hand stilled. And what did you say? I told him to mind his own business, but... She paused. What if he's right? Right about what? About me getting bored. About this not being enough. Daniel stood slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. Is that what you're worried about? I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if I made this decision too quickly. If I jumped into this because I was desperate and scared and didn't have other options. And now that you do have options, I don't know what I want anymore. Daniel crossed to her and took her hands. Listen to me. If you want to leave, if this isn't what you thought it would be, I won't stop you. I meant what I said before. You're not trapped here. But I am, legally. The contract doesn't mean anything. I'll tear it up right now if that's what you need. Nora looked at him, this complicated, stubborn, grief-worn man who was trying so hard to do right by her. What do you want? She asked. I want you to be happy, even if that means being happy somewhere else. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give. Because wanting you to stay just so I don't have to be alone again, that's selfish, and you deserve better than my selfishness. Nora pulled her hands free and turned away, frustrated. Why do you always do this? Why do you always try to push me away whenever things get difficult? I'm not pushing you away. I'm giving you a choice. I already made my choice. I married you. And maybe that was a mistake. The words hung between them, sharp and painful. Do you think it was a mistake? Nora asked quietly. Daniel was silent for a long moment. I think I took advantage of your situation. I think I offered you security when you were vulnerable, and you accepted because you didn't see another way forward. And I think maybe we both convinced ourselves it was more than that because we wanted it to be. So you regret marrying me? No, but I think you might, eventually. Nora turned to face him. You're so certain you know what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, but you don't. You're projecting your own fears onto me. Maybe. Definitely. She stepped closer. You're terrified that I'm going to wake up one day and realize I made a terrible mistake, that I'm going to leave like everyone else has left. So you're trying to push me away first, to protect yourself. That's not... Yes, it is. And I understand it, I do. But I need you to hear me when I say this. I'm not leaving. I had doubts today, yes. I had a moment of wondering if I made the right choice. But that's normal. That's what happens when you make a big decision. You question it sometimes. But what if it's more than just questioning? Then we'll deal with it, together. She took his face in her hands. I'm not saying this is going to be easy. I'm not saying I'll never have doubts or fears or moments of wondering what else I could have done with my life. But I'm saying that I choose this every day. I'm choosing this. Daniel closed his eyes. I don't want to lose you. Then stop trying to make me leave. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. I'm sorry, I'm not good at this. Neither am I. We're both making it up as we go. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the dusty barn while the sick calf made soft noises in the background. Finally, Daniel pulled back enough to look at her. I love you. I don't say it enough, but I do. I know, I love you too. Even when I'm being an idiot? Especially then. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his whole face. You're remarkable, you know that? So you keep telling me. They went back to the house together, hand in hand, still figuring out how to be married, but doing it together. That evening, after the children were in bed, they finally moved Nora's things from her room to Daniel's. It was a small change, but it felt significant. A public declaration that they were truly married, truly together. As Nora unpacked her few belongings into the dresser that had been Marie's, she felt the ghost of the other woman in the room. Not threatening or possessive, just present. Does it bother you? Daniel asked, watching her. Being in this room? Sleeping in the bed I shared with her? A little, Nora admitted, but I also understand that this is part of who you are. You can't erase 15 years of marriage just because you've started a new one. I don't want to erase it, but I also don't want you to feel like you're living in her shadow. I think that's inevitable to some degree. She was your first love, the mother of your children. She built this life with you. Nora closed the dresser drawer. But I'm building a different life with you, one that honors what came before but isn't defined by it. Daniel crossed to her and wrapped his arms around her waist from behind. How did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just practical. Same thing sometimes. They stood together, looking out the window at the darkening fields. Are we going to be all right? Nora asked quietly. I think so. As long as we keep talking to each other. Keep being honest about the hard stuff. Even when it's uncomfortable? Especially then. Nora leaned back against him. I can do that. So can I. That night, for the first time, they slept in the same bed. It was awkward at first, neither of them quite sure where to put their limbs, how close to get, whether to talk or just sleep. But eventually they found a position that worked. Nora's back to Daniel's chest, his arm around her waist. Good night, she whispered. Good night. And in the darkness, in the bed that had held so much history, they began writing their own story. The months passed. Summer faded into fall. The ranch thrived under their combined management, Daniel's knowledge of the land and Nora's organizational skills complementing each other perfectly. The children grew and changed. Sam shot up 3 inches and lost a tooth. Lizzie started reading more advanced books and helping with the cattle. And slowly, painfully, the town began to accept the marriage. It helped that Nora showed up to every community event, head held high, refusing to be cowed by gossip. It helped that the children clearly thrived. It helped that Daniel and Nora were obviously genuinely happy. Even Carl Hutchins eventually moved on to other grievances. Margaret Hendricks stopped by one day, unannounced. Nora was in the garden when she arrived. Her heart sank, expecting another interrogation. But Hendricks dismounted with a smile. Mrs. Calhoun, you're looking well. Mrs. Hendricks? I was in the area and thought I'd stop by, see how you're settling in. I'm settled. So I see. Hendricks looked around, at the well-tended garden, the clean house, the children playing in the yard. I'll admit I had my doubts about this arrangement. I thought you were making a mistake. And now? Now, I think I was wrong. Or at least, not entirely right. Hendricks met her eyes. You seem happy. Genuinely happy. The children are thriving, the ranch is doing well, and Daniel, well, he's different from how he was last time I saw him. Different how? Lighter, like he's remembered how to hope. Nora didn't know what to say to that. I came to apologize, Hendricks continued, for assuming the worst, for interfering, for trying to save you from a situation that didn't need saving. You were trying to help. I was trying to fix something that wasn't broken. Hendricks pulled an envelope from her pocket. This is the letter I gave you before the wedding, the one with the resources for leaving. I'd like it back, if you still have it. Nora had kept it, tucked away in a drawer. She retrieved it now and handed it over. Hendricks tore it in half. You don't need this. You've built something real here. Thank you. But, Hendricks held up a hand. If you ever do need help for any reason, my offer still stands. Not because I think you're making a mistake, but because every woman should have resources and options, just in case. I appreciate that. Hendricks mounted her horse. Take care of yourself, Mrs. Calhoun, and of that family. They're lucky to have you. She rode away, and Nora stood in the garden feeling like she'd just passed some kind of test she hadn't known she was taking. That winter was hard. The snows came early and stayed late. They lost some cattle to the cold. Money got tight. But they managed. They always managed. And somewhere in the middle of that long, dark winter, Nora realized she was pregnant. She knew before she told Daniel. Knew from the way her body felt different, the way food tasted strange, the way she was tired all the time. When she finally told him, he went pale. Are you sure? Pretty sure. But I didn't think... He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. A baby. A baby, she confirmed. How do you feel about it? Terrified, excited, overwhelmed. She touched her still flat stomach. All of it at once. Daniel crossed to her and placed his hand over hers. I'm scared too, but also, his voice roughened, also grateful that we get to do this, that we get to build a family together. We already have a family. I know, but this, he pressed gently, this is ours, together. They told the children that evening. Sam was ecstatic, immediately listing all the things he'd teach the baby. Lizzie was quieter, more thoughtful. Later, when Sam was in bed, she came to Nora's room. Can I ask you something? She said. Always.
Will you love this baby more than you love me and Sam, since it's really yours? Nora's heart broke a little. Come here. Lizzie sat beside her on the bed. Listen to me, Nora said. Love isn't a finite resource. Having this baby doesn't mean I'll have less love for you and Sam. It means I'll have more love, period. And you and Sam will always be my children, not biologically, but in every way that matters. You mean that? I mean that. Lizzie leaned against her shoulder. Good. Because I was getting used to having you around. Just getting used to it? Fine. Maybe a little more than that. Nora wrapped an arm around her. I love you too. They sat together until Lizzie yawned and went to her own bed. The baby came in early summer, a squalling, red-faced girl they named Rose. The birth was long and difficult, and there was a moment when Daniel stood pale-faced in the doorway, clearly reliving Marie's death. But Nora survived. Both she and the baby survived. When Daniel held his daughter for the first time, tears streamed down his face. She looks like you, he said to Nora. She looks like a potato. He laughed, the sound shaky but genuine. The most beautiful potato I've ever seen. Sam and Lizzie crowded around, wanting to see their new sister. She's so small, Sam marveled. You were that small once, Daniel told him. No, I wasn't. You were. Lizzie reached out tentatively to touch the baby's tiny hand. Rose grabbed her finger instinctively, and Lizzie's face softened. Hi, Rose, she whispered. I'm your big sister.
And watching them, all of them, this strange patchwork family she'd somehow become part of, Nora felt something settle deep in her chest. This was what she'd chosen. This messy, complicated, beautiful life. And she'd choose it again in a heartbeat. The years that followed weren't perfect. They fought sometimes. Money was tight more often than not. The town never completely accepted their unconventional beginning, though the gossip eventually died down to background noise. But they built something real, something lasting. Sam grew into a lanky teenager who wanted to be a veterinarian. Lizzie became a fierce, brilliant young woman who read everything she could get her hands on. Rose was a whirlwind of energy and opinions from the moment she could talk. The ranch expanded. They added more cattle, bought adjacent land when it came available, built a new barn. And through it all, Nora and Daniel learned how to be married, how to fight fair and forgive quickly, how to support each other's dreams and carry each other's burdens. On their 5th anniversary, Daniel found Nora on the porch, watching the sunset. What are you thinking about? He asked, sitting beside her. Everything, nothing. She leaned against his shoulder. I was just remembering the day of the auction, how terrified I was, how certain I was that my life was over. And now? Now I know it was just beginning. Daniel kissed the top of her head. Any regrets? Nora thought about it, thought about the hard days and the fear and the judgment, thought about all the things she might have done differently if she'd had more choices. Not a single one, she said. And she meant it. Because the truth was, freedom wasn't about having unlimited choices. It was about having the power to choose what mattered most. And she'd chosen this man, this family, this life. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. And that made all the difference. Years later, when Nora was older and her children were grown with families of their own, she'd sit on that same porch and watch the sun set over the same fields. People would ask her sometimes about her story, about how she came to the ranch, about the auction, about marrying a man under such circumstances. And she'd tell them the truth, that it started with desperation and circumstance, but became something else entirely. She'd tell them that you can't always choose how your story begins, but you can choose how it continues. She'd tell them that love isn't always a grand gesture or a perfect romance. Sometimes it's just two broken people deciding to be less broken together. She'd tell them that home isn't a place you find. It's something you build, piece by piece, day by day, with the people who choose to stand beside you. And when they'd ask if she'd do it all again, knowing how hard it would be, she'd smile and say yes. Every single time, yes. Because that's what it meant to truly choose your own life. Not to have perfect circumstances or unlimited options, but to take what you're given and make something beautiful from it anyway. And Nora Calhoun, once Nora Finch sold at auction for $200, had done exactly that. She'd taken a beginning that felt like an ending and turned it into a life worth living. And in the end, that was the only freedom that mattered.